Hello YouTube and welcome to the fifth part of my talk, Reducing the Competition for the Serial Channels of Belonging, Bitcoin Modeled as White Noise, and the Radical Parallelization of Work in the 21st Century. Part 5 is about maximizing freedom of movement across the board, and some initial thoughts on all the recent events. It's almost impossible to keep up with what's going on, and from my own perspective, I think the most important thing is managing the emotions and not letting things get to you. Between COVID and the economy and now this US election kerfuffle, we need to maintain the self-responsibility and the emotional control and allow the space for good things to happen. My main concern as a professional from this election outcome is that, number one, I think there are a number of legitimate concerns that would be held up as legitimate in any country. If there's election observers complaining that they're not allowed to observe, there's questions on postal ballots and things. I mean, these are sort of legitimate concerns, and we need to have adult discussions about these things and let everyone have their say. And I feel social media is descending into a shit fight between children. And for a country that's dropped an incalculable number of bombs on other countries for not living up to the values of freedom and democracy, to see America now floundering is very sad, actually. I'm 36 years old now. I remember, they bombed all over the Middle East, Africa, this, that, Bosnia, through my lifetime, and then, now they can't even get their own house in order. So we shouldn't. I think there is a sort of a fundamental shift going on. And we shouldn't trust what's coming out of the media, out of social media. We should revert more to fundamentals, okay? And I think in terms of blockchain, it's only a matter of time now before someone comes out saying blockchain is the perfect way to have 100% safe elections, etc., etc. But this isn't true, and because if you use blockchain, you're just shifting the problem over to the identity management. And that's really a very important human rights issue, and we shouldn't let the technology industry pull the wool over our eyes and pull a fast one on us, I think. So I think just whatever happens from now on, it's important to look inside for the truth. Don't expect it to come from outside. And also, there's no replacement for self-responsibility, accountability, and genuine social cohesion and compassion. Technology and politics and all these things are never gonna replace that. Okay, that's what spirituality is for, religion is for, and we can't expect things of politics or technology or the news or any of these other things to act as a crutch for what we're fundamentally lacking right now, which I think is longer attention spans, more genuine accountability and leadership. It's amazing to me the number of leaders today who are there in the good times and they're leadership experts in the good times. And like Jose Mourinho, for example, a year, 18 months ago, everyone was slating him. Oh, his time's up, he's over now. Then he goes to manage Tottenham, beats Man United, his old club, 6-1. Where were all his critics then, just to apologise? None of them. And loads of leadership experts were slating him, business leaders, this and that. And we should always remember that there's a lot of experts that are there in the good times, and when people are down there, they're to stick the boot in. But when it changes up, where are they? Okay, and I think that's the real measure of accountability and leadership, and we're not measuring that right now. and we're not taking a long-term enough view. So, and this doesn't mean we should retreat from the world and have a cold-hearted attitude. We can show compassion, but we don't necessarily have to trust. Okay, so I would say, exercise maximum compassion and minimum trust, and go back to fundamentals, go back to what's proven to work, and ignore all this noise and all this childishness from adults who are really behaving like children, throwing their toys out of the pram, in my opinion. And don't ever accept any sort of magic wand solution to any of this from anyone in technology or blockchain. Especially in blockchain, the industry is so fundamentally untrustworthy. I wouldn't trust these people any further than I could throw them off a bridge, to be honest. Okay, it's a bit harsh, but that's how we need to think about it. We definitely shouldn't be throwing our citizenship rights and our human rights into the hands of these people. Especially to young people, I want to say this is not your fault. If you're in a lot of debt, you're struggling to get by, you're afraid about the future, that's not on you. Okay, I'm 36 now. I've spent a long time in business and really seen firsthand all the Dunning-Kruger effect, fair weather leaders who are there in the good times, not in the bad. People who are happy to kick the boot in when you're down, but when you're back up again, they run away. And really, it's the older generation have failed on so many levels. And don't internalize that. Never internalize that. Never give up hope. Everyone has value, and the future is in our hands. Okay. So with that being said, to briefly recap on talk 4, we had this other way of describing deathly embrace, whereby Romeo on the yellow square and Juliet on the red square are awaiting an asynchronous communication from each other that never comes. And I'd sort of say that this is where the blockchain industry in general is at right now. I think it's mostly been deliberately engineered to stop any progress. And if things like voting on the blockchain start to come up now, then we should really, really hold the horses there, because there's so much more we need to do before we can start running the critical operations of society on top of this technology. So beware, okay? And we also went over the fact that those who were promised all the nice things in 2014 and still want them are being fed bad information in the network by the insiders who ran the ICO scams and overpromised on what Ethereum could do, and then basically ran off with all the money, slinked away. Okay, but they're still operating in the network, and they're kind of still feeding those with the early expectations, bad information. So, and we should always remember this. And then in talk 1, we talked about how, according to the perception map that the media and social media have built of the world, there's really nowhere that anyone who wants to make serious positive change in the world can go on this map and remain safe and do so in a constructive way. So from my time as a chemical engineer, there's a very useful principle in UK major accident hazard safety regulations called a LARP, and it means as low as reasonably practicable. Okay, and if we're dealing with major accident hazards, we want to make them as low as reasonably practicable. And it's getting to the stage now where things are so bad for young people and the opportunities are drying up and there's so much risk that it is verging on a major accident hazard, I would say. It's verging on a open conflict situation. And I think we really have to treat this like there's a fire going, and we need to lower the risk of that fire to as low as reasonably practicable. Okay. So in the meantime, since my last talk, there have been quite a few great long form podcasts that were done that touched upon some of the themes of my previous talks. A couple of the Joe Rogan ones, I didn't so much like the Alex Jones one, but the Glenn Greenwald one was really excellent. And Glenn Greenwald explained the toxicity of surveillance capitalism and the difficulties of maintaining his professional integrity as a journalist while operating in these social media networks and economic networks that can behave so toxically. Likewise, Tristan Harris gave a great talk. Actually, some of it was very, very shocking, particularly with respect to launching Facebook in third world countries. Literally, Facebook has been a cause of basically genocide in several countries, and it's basically been responsible for killing people, and there's no accountability for that. And then if we're thinking how we're interacting with social media today, watch that Joe Rogan podcast and remember how much social media really doesn't care about you or your life, okay? They really just don't. And it's quite shocking stuff, but to maintain safety in today's world, I think it's so important that we watch these things because they're new and they're getting out of control in ways that were never predicted. And then Lex Friedman number 134 with Eric Weinstein. 1 hour of it was so-so, but I think the rest of it was absolutely superb. And Lex and Eric are two very, very smart guys with good hearts, and they were discussing the difficulties of kind of producing genuine novel scientific innovation and of having proper scientific integrity in networks, both academic and online. And I'll put the links in the description to those. I thought they were deep, hard-hitting, and probably in total there's 9 hours of listening there, but all really essential stuff. Okay. And the common themes were that big tech and surveillance capitalism are operating far beyond their safe operating envelope, with absolutely no accountability for the consequences. We don't really have the laws to manage this stuff, and we don't really have the leaders who are really interested in managing it. I think our leaders see social media and they see these systems as ways to get an edge on their competition. But the number one role of governance is to protect the community, okay? And if our leaders are taking advantage of dangerous things in order to gain a political edge, I think it really undermines the basic purpose of governance, which number one is to protect young people. Okay, and Tristan Harris goes into great depths about how Facebook is warping the minds of young people and warping their perception. Flat Earth theory is a good example of that, but there are other ones, you know, and Tristan was quite open in saying that my map with the reptilian aliens in the top right hand corner is actually accurate according to what the Facebook algorithms are feeding the kids. And we're building up so many problems for the future that we really need to get a grip on this. And when I worked in safety engineering, I found it to be quite boring and quite bureaucratic. But looking at this now, I really think the UK major accident hazard safety legislation really gives us a firm legal precedent on how to start managing this stuff. And Eric Weinstein makes the point that for a very long time, every 12 months, the average age of anyone in a leadership position has gone up by 9 months. And this has been going on for so long that the people in leadership positions, they're like Joe Biden. They're mentally deranged. I mean, people probably voted for Joe Biden because they hated Trump so much. Fair enough. But Joe Biden, to me, is a protest vote mostly. And is Joe Biden going to solve any of this stuff? No, he's not. He's not not physically, mentally capable of getting a grip on these modern problems. So, as people who are smart, educated, ambitious, and want to change things, we have to take this responsibility. We can't spend all day on social media blaming this and that, expecting politicians to do it for us. They're never going to do it for us. We have to do it. Okay, and it doesn't matter if we've been disenfranchised, if we feel upset. Everyone feels upset. Everyone feels disenfranchised. Everyone feels the system is somehow unfair and treating them unfairly. That's normal. Okay, that's not an excuse. That's basically all the more reason to go for it. And if I have sort of one criticism of Eric Weinstein and Lex Friedman, it would be they're not bold enough. Okay, this is essentially boxing or martial arts when you're going to make change, and you have to be confident and you have to go for it. And I think there's sort of too many people beating about the bush or trying to be too secretive and too cute, and just need to go for it. Okay, I think a lot more people need to go for it, and the more people go for it, people will see them go for it. Like once the prison walls go down, once people see people going over the prison wall, there's a critical mass where everyone's going to start doing it. But we can't just sort of stay in prison and talk about the prison break. I think we just need to be a bit more bold and make a run for it. The people trying to stop us are old. They're self-interested. When the chips are down, I find they're not particularly courageous, and they're more interested in protecting their fuzzy, nice position than they are in actually getting down and dirty and sticking up for themselves. So you're better off whacking them in the nose than trying to be nice about it or trying to be too cute about it. But that's my opinion. But anyway, Eric, Lex, respect to you. Great conversation. That's just my opinion, basically. And I think the good news is we have all the technology available to actually pull us back from the brink of this mess that we're in. And we really have to, I think it's important that we just lay this mess at the feet of the older generation, of the baby boomers. And I think this US election really lays bare that when it's down to the difficult things of leadership, dealing with the unexpected outcomes of new technology, actually defending people you disagree with based upon upholding principles that we all have to agree upon, like free and fair elections. Okay, whatever people think, I think the Trump supporters do have legitimate concerns, and then it's up to proper leaders to stand up and say, hold on a minute, let's if these election observers don't feel like they're being allowed to observe, let them observe. America's invaded countries precisely for that reason. So we need, if we're killing people, shooting people for not doing this in another country, we need to stand by those values in our own country. And when it comes to the real time to separate the men from the boys, where are the men? I don't see any. Or the women from the girls. I don't see very many at all. I see a lot of people whining, moaning, calling each other names, threatening each other. It's not good enough. it's only gonna hurt the weakest the most. Okay, it's really just, instead of coming together, we need to come together to raise up the youth, to raise up the weakest in society, and re-enfranchise them. And the more time the strong spend fighting with each other, the less time we're actually doing our job as leaders. Okay. And leadership requires self-responsibility, being proactive and informed. And I think we have to challenge incumbent leadership with new thinking, new concepts, and new products of what's possible, and to reframe the conversation. And this is what I'm going to attempt to do in the following slides. And it requires the 0 to 1 thinking. And just to remind you what this is the path that we need to set out on. Okay, if we set out on any other path, we're going to become sequestered into the mess that's engulfing us, and we're going to end up serving it, or we're going to end up being put in an impossible situation that goes against our core values, where we're doing the wrong thing, and we know we are, just to put food on the table or to protect our career or what have you. Okay, and if we're calling ourselves leaders, it's not good enough. Okay, we have to pick one thing or the other. We cannot be a leader and do this properly, or stop calling ourselves leaders and just call ourselves something else, a follower, an employee, okay, and sort of muddle by and get through it. But now is the time to make a choice, because I don't think we can. If you're trying to do both, you're going to get found out. And I think there's a lot of people getting found out at the moment, and that's just going to continue to happen. So in this talk, I'm going to briefly introduce 3 new concepts that really radically change the freedom of movement and the ability of people to get gainful employment, gainful productive employment, in a sustainable economy that meets the basic needs of all. Okay, it's a bold claim, but I'm a bold kind of a guy. Okay, so first thing is modular autonomous factories that are 95% cheaper than today. That exists. Okay, gaming as engineering simulation. Okay, that already exists as well. Okay, and Git plus Factum for engineering documentation, management, proof of provenance, and quality assurance. Okay, this is the number one thing missing, in my opinion, that's preventing ordinary people from doing what Bechtel do or what Wood Group do. Okay, and it's essentially documentation management, and having verifiable engineering signatures and processes in place that make the engineering work insurable. Okay. And Git has a nice feature in that it's a Merkle tree. So something like Factum is a Merkle tree, and then Bitcoin is a Merkle tree. Isn't that convenient and wonderful? Okay, I'll explain more about that in a bit. Number one thing, how many hours a day worldwide are wasted with people arguing back and forth on social media about this and that? Okay, a monumental amount of productive capacity is being sucked down a black hole from whence nothing will return. Okay, when we're essentially being distracted, we have everything at our fingertips to actually solve the problems we claim we want to solve. Okay, but we're not doing it. And social media isn't designed to solve your problems. Social media is designed to keep your attention to sell advertising. Okay, so the social media is not connected to any robots. It's not connected to any manufacturing. It's not connected to any reputation management system that makes your signature an insurable asset. Okay, it's not helping you. And we need to have more design thinking and less kind of aggressive, combative thinking in this sink that is social media. I think Aggression and combat are fine in a ring, in an octagon, in a boxing ring, where both people know the rules, there's a referee, it's a kind of a safe environment, and you can just let it out, okay? But I already explained on social media, in the online networks, no one knows the rules, and there is no referee. And Facebook is launching their app in countries where it's literally causing genocides, and no one's prosecuting them for that. Okay, so let's deal with the reality as it is now, okay, and grow up a bit, I would say. So this stuff is punted around a lot, and there's very few people actually doing anything about it. However, we'll attempt to change that just now. So, probably seen this before. Linear economy is a line, okay, and the waste just goes out the other side and it's not accounted for, and it ends up in the sea or in the air, or it ends up as a war, or what have you. Okay, there's a book, Corporation. It explains how corporations are basically just externalizing machines. Okay, and we need to get away from this, because this is kind of what's killing us. Technology and mining, business, what have you. We all recognize this is bad, and we're spending a lot of money to try and solve this, but we're not changing the core conceptual design of how we organize ourselves to change it. So nothing really changes, okay? And what we want to move towards is a circular economy where what comes out the other end is fed back into what goes in, okay? And we want to do that for two reasons. One, it stops pollution, and two, it shortens our supply chains, okay? Because the clothes you're wearing right now, okay, can anyone say with 100% certainty that they weren't made by slave labor? None of us can. Okay? Can any of us be sure 100% that the rare earth metals in our phone weren't the result of warlord conflicts in Africa? No, we can't. Okay, we can, and it's these long supply chains of physical goods that where we're separated from their provenance that allows so many bad things to go on. And if we take an ALARP risk management view, okay, as low as reasonably practicable, the best way to mitigate the risk is to not allow for the risk in the first place, okay? And this means we recycle everything within, say, 10, 20 miles of where we live, okay? That's how they do it in the major accident hazard industries. Lots of people don't like the oil industry or the chemical industry, but it has these good ideas, these tried and tested ways of managing risk. And it seems to me that it's a much more sensible way to think about the problem than the way we're trying to combat it now. So, cube spawn, the prototype is currently being constructed, and the concept is that autonomous manufacturing unit operations can each be contained within a 22 centimeter cube or multiple thereof, okay? And that these cubes can work with each other in a variety of configurations straight out of the box. And this could potentially make autonomous factories 95% cheaper than they are today. Because the main cost of an autonomous factory is not the equipment itself. It is actually the cost of making all the equipment work with each other once it's been put in place. So you could spend $100,000 on equipment from different vendors, but then to make it all work with each other according to the regulations, you'd have to spend a minimum of $900,000 in man hours. Okay, an idea with CubeSpawn is that you just do away with that and everything works out of the box, and everything works out of the box in a modular way that can be rearranged. So you could own a factory for $50,000 that not only makes one thing, but you rearrange the cubes like Legos and it could perhaps make 10 other things. And I think this really helps with what I consider to be the number one problem with factories and the history of factories in the West, is that they make one thing or two things, but when the economics change, when the corporation or the business wants to take advantage of cheaper labor elsewhere, or there's no longer demand for that specific good, the factories go derelict. Okay, it's like the Glasgow shipyards. And then what happens to all the people? They go on benefits, okay? And then you end up with these endemic long-term urban social problems that don't go away. So if we have a working class that is relying on factory equipment, it's fundamentally unsafe, not only for them, but for future generations, if that factory equipment is not as flexible and modular as possible. Because the more flexible and modular it is, the more it can adapt to the current economic situation, and it reduces the risk of mass unemployment and multi-generational welfare dependency, which I think is one of the biggest social problems in the West today. And at 95% cheaper, CubeSpawn allows for ownership of the means of production at community or even individual level. Instead of a factory costing the same as a mansion, a factory costs the same as a nice car, okay? I mean, it's a complete order of magnitude difference in price, and that shifts the supply-demand curve so substantially. And it's amazing to me that we could do this now, yet it's not even being talked about. It's hardly even being talked about. There's a link to a TEDx talk, I'll put it in the description. And James Jones, he's a wonderful guy. I work with him quite a lot, and he really walks the talk. He lives a sustainable life. He almost lives completely independently of money. He's a fascinating chap, does almost everything himself. And a really refreshing difference from the typical sort of Silicon Valley or corporate technology speaker. Okay. And this CubeSpawn allows for a brand new left-wing policy paradigm. Okay. The current system of left-wing politics is to tax the big business and to share the benefits of capitalist production with their constituents. Okay, but the problem with this is to take big business's money means you have to fundamentally give up influence to them, because the money they make is responsible for essentially keeping a lot of people alive, okay? And this allows big business to lobby the government and get undue influence over government, which further cements inequality, further cements resistance to real change, and conflict, which we're almost at the stage where we're seeing open internecine conflict in the West at the moment, I think, and of course weak environmental regulation. But CubeSpawn lowers the cost of owning a part of the means of production so substantially that we could talk about ownership of the means of production for every citizen as a human right. And for me, this is so wonderful. We have these cubes that are literally almost like, they're not gold bars, they're not inert, they're pieces of autonomous factory. They're such a good unit of account of capital formation, and we could have like basic human capital. And this is so much better than universal basic income, where essentially there's such a big risk that we'll all become peons and feudal slaves to big tech if we rely on universal basic income. It'll be great to begin with, but they'll stick their tentacles all into the government, and before you know it, there'll be stipulations and rules on what you can do to claim your universal basic income, while big tech owns all the capital and you can't argue back, and you're not in a negotiating position to argue back. The number one thing, critical thing of Marxian logic, in my mind, is that the working class, ordinary people, have to physically own pieces of the means of production to give them a solid negotiating position with the state, with big business, with the power structure. Otherwise, really, I think there's no, in the worst case, there's really no depth to which human beings won't sink in a race to the bottom in order to maintain and control each other. So having this balance, this game theory balance where everyone has a backstop and everyone can feel safe, I think will just really improve society and improve our ability to make decisions, be more long-term thinking, and to let a lot of the air out and the heat out of this mimetic conflict that's currently going on, whether it's left-wing or right-wing. It's all based on fear and disappointment, and the fear of being left out in the cold, which is ever present, and often for a lot of people, if you're left out in the cold, there's no way back. Whereas if everyone has their own factory and they're all educated with the ability to use it, I think that's just it's game changing in terms of our sense of belonging to our community, our society, and on this planet. And the numbers of CubeSpawn compare quite interestingly to some other numbers that the state or the government is currently paying, and also young people are paying. Okay, so I don't need to read this off the slide for you. The main thing is CubeSpawn costs $50,000, and it's roughly of the same order of magnitude as the cost of incarceration, annual tax revenue, average student debt, external debt per capita. I mean, would we rather have in the UK every citizen owning 2 factories, okay? Or would we rather have what we have now, where the older generation took out loads of debt on our behalf and spent it all on holidays and home improvements and left us to pick up the tab, and we basically have nothing? You decide. I think we really need to change our thinking here. Okay. And if we think about how this could operate as a network, people could purchase CubeSpawn privately and operate within only legal or regulatory stipulations, sort of as a business or as a hobby in their garage, as a useful appliance, okay? But also the state, with its greater access to capital at lower rates, could take out a loan to issue pretty much everyone in society, conceivably, with their own factory, on the stipulation that they spend X% of the operational time producing for the common good, whatever that is, whether it be face masks, parts of ventilators, parts of defense equipment, parts of police cars, whatever it might be. That seems to me to be a much better use of capital than bailing out big business, bailing out zombie businesses, and essentially continuing, most of which are owned by boomers, many of which they are responsible for ruining, and continuing to use public money to bail them out again and again and again. Okay, this destroys capital and destroys wealth and sets such a terrible example to the next generation about how capital is formed and how influence in society is accrued. So I think it's time to take a much more productive capacity focused view than a using capital as a palliative for the complete mess that a certain generation has created. Okay. And thus manufacturing can essentially become like a public grid utility, like energy or transport. And if it were that, a lot of this trade tension stuff would go away. Most wars, in my opinion, tend to start with economic disputes and escalate from there. Many theorists on war would agree with that, and I think the way to reduce conflict is to essentially turn manufacturing of finished and semi-finished goods into something more like a utility and less like a weapon of war. Okay. And while CubeSpawn would allow for a circular economy in the local sphere, when it's connected up to a network, it can benefit from global knowledge, can download intellectual property of all different kinds of designs made from all different kinds of raw materials. Okay, and this is how we should be designing the future, is with local use of physical resources and global use of knowledge. And in this paradigm, we can achieve the Marxian vision of mass ownership of the means of production and shift the conversation more to how that production capacity is utilized and for whom, rather than arguing over who gets the money and who's left indebted paying for it. Okay. And an object capability blockchain, I'm very excited about R-Chain. I think R-Chain could really revolutionize the sharing of engineering intellectual property online, allowing engineers to both share their intellectual property and capitalize from it, would allow for global engineering knowledge and local circular physical resource management. That's what we should be aiming for. That can work. It can work really well for everyone, make everyone feel like they have a strong sense of belonging in their communities, in their societies, their economy, and break this cycle of disenfranchisement, bailing out of bad behavior, resulting moral hazard, and then kicking the can down the road. That's the example we've been set by the baby boomer generation, but we have everything in our power now to do it differently. Okay, if we treat global catastrophes like pollution, war, climate change, COVID-19, etc., as major accident hazards, then according to UK safety legislation on major accident hazard prevention, the opportunity for system complexity should be reduced to as low as reasonably practicable. Okay, as should the resulting consequences of any accident happening. Okay, CubeSpawn fulfills these UK legal requirements where other technologies frankly fail. Managing the provenance, things like Materium or Jesse Baker's provenance. I like Vine, I like Jesse, but putting things with long supply chains on the blockchain doesn't reduce the risk to a LARP. Okay, all it does is improve the quality assurance of a fundamentally unsafe system. Okay, in my opinion, if we're talking about climate change as a major accident hazard, CubeSpawn is the best available technology from a global coordination risk management perspective. Okay, it fulfills the LARP requirement where others fail. I'm not saying that Materium and Provenance don't have a place, but for me, the fundamental risk reduction comes from CubeSpawn and ideas like that. And one benefit of this is that right now, the enforcement of the quality of physical goods is often left to the border police and customs. Okay, if we're making it ourselves, we can reduce the burden on the border police and customs and make that the remit of local, regional, and national law enforcement. Okay, and the less we're importing, okay, the less opportunity there is for human trafficking, drugs, organized crime, illegal arms, all that stuff. And then enforcement of the sharing of engineering knowledge is then left to intelligence services, which is what they're designed to do. I think, border police, customs, intelligence services, the way we've designed our systems, the way they've grown, are actually legal law enforcement mechanisms are operating outside their design envelope. And that's leaving us open to risks that we don't necessarily, we shouldn't necessarily normalize these things. We should just treat it like, what are border police and customs for? What are intelligence services for? And then sort of design our systems around making them fit for purpose instead of expecting everything to do something that it can't, which is where I would argue we're at now. Okay. Next thing is Makerverse, and I did the robotic software engineering nano degree at Udacity. And I thought there were some really great open source tools for simulating robotics. And it's very similar to gaming software. The tools I used on my nano degree were Gazebo and RViz. But since then, NVIDIA has the Omniverse Isaac simulator and also NVIDIA Holodeck, which you can upload CAD drawings to. And then people around the world can meet in a virtual reality environment and review those designs in real time with each other. And Bell Helicopters recently accelerated the development of their latest helicopter by 5 years simply by using NVIDIA Holodeck. This is amazingly powerful technology, and it just baffles me that we're not making this technology more available to more gamers, especially young people whose opportunities are drying up, who are facing so many risks, who are being led astray left, right, and center by their leaders and by social media companies. And when they're playing games, the monetization methods of those games are often very toxic, casino-like, extractive, and big business is sequestering the value that NVIDIA generate by testing their equipment on kids, on these gamers, because NVIDIA isn't selling Holodeck to the general public. They sell it as a B2B service. So essentially, gamers and game developers are left out in the cold in these bad working conditions with kind of myopic, shitty management. Some of the stories I've heard of the game industry will just make your eyes water. It's so bad. And then all these kind of predatory pricing mechanisms and monetization mechanisms, while Bell Helicopters is making money hand over fist using this technology. And I think it's so essential now that we give gamers the ability to capitalize upon the simulation value of the graphics processing unit technology. Instead of big business and corporations hogging it, we have millions of kids playing games, and it's such a brilliant opportunity to educate them and to bring them into doing constructive, whether it be simulation or testing. And these could be good jobs that pay good wages that they could do on their PlayStation 5 in their bedroom. And it just baffles me why we're not doing this. We could do it very quickly. But the GPU makers are too interested in sort of fighting with each other. And I think there's sort of fundamentally a thing in big business where they do want to rent seek from the value maximization of the technology. But it's getting to such a stage now where, to me, it's indefensible. It's indefensible that Bell Helicopters, Boeing, Lockheed can be profiting so much from the same technology that's keeping kids in their basement, being screwed over for loot boxes and kind of $1,000 items on Fortnite that have no relation to the real world. It's something that's just ripe for change and we can do right now. And especially with blockchain technology, we can open up as many parallel channels as are necessary for gamers and game developers to capitalize upon the power of GPUs to simulate engineering. And you could have professional engineers designing and building robots, cars, autonomous cars, flying cars even, and then gamers testing and participating in stress tests and war games. I definitely think now, with modern warfare, with the use of drone warfare, autonomous weapons. It's absolutely essential that we have mass participation and simulation in war games to really bring the public discourse up to speed on the dangers of these technologies and how best to defend against them. The opportunities for asymmetric attacks, asymmetric warfare these days, it's very dangerous. Dominic Cummings in the UK has said a few things about this. And while sort of Call of Duty and these things have a place, I think mass participation using gaming technology, simulation technology, will raise the public discourse and take the responsibility for the defense of our freedom and our country and our safety kind of back into our own hands, and take the discussion to a new level where we have more kind of public responsibility for this stuff. Because, you know, right now we've got a Royal Navy that's pretty much useless. In most modern warfare cases would get blown out of the water, and then we got more admirals than ships. And, you know, it's fine for the old folks in their gold braid swanning about, but, you know, what about the country they're there to defend? To me, they don't really care anymore. And, you know, we have everything within our power to change this. So currently I've kind of mixed the idea of cube spawn and Makerverse to create a simple game called Cube Spawn Maker, which is version 0 of Makerverse, which just allows the players to put their cubes together to make different things like Legos, and then pin their designs to the blockchain and share those designs with other players on the blockchain to start proving concept of intellectual property sharing on the blockchain. In version 1 will start to look more like NVIDIA Isaac, the Willow Garage tools, RViz, robotic operating system, that type of stuff. But more gamified, more fun, better, more usable user interfaces, not relying on Linux and command line terminals, but keyboard and mouse, control pad, that kind of thing. And then once that's built out, the opportunities to do things like proper civil engineering and even metropolitan planning are immense. And, you know, if we're going to do this kind of smart city stuff, this Internet of Things stuff properly, it does require this mass participation and lots of simulation and testing in a safe environment to make sure that when it's built properly that it functions how we expect. And also to have some kind of public commons where this stuff can be experimented with and tested, and we're not just sold things by big business and by the government that operate in the government's interests or business interests and not in our own interest. And the more we can simulate, the better the outcome is going to be. But we shouldn't just... I mean, I feel right now with smart cities and IoT and a lot of this stuff, the stuff is just thrown out, and then we're essentially experimenting on real people in the real world with things that we don't know the final outcome of or what the risks might be. I mean, the social credit score is a very good example of that. You know, it's very threatening to human rights, very threatening to whistleblowers and upholding proper democracy. You know, a lot of these things could be used to bully people and silence people in very pernicious ways. And if this stuff isn't tested robustly and discussed robustly in a transparent way, then it's just frankly dangerous, in my opinion. So this part is probably going to be quite complicated, and if you don't understand all of it, I totally understand. essentially, from my experience as an engineer, document management is the number one most important thing that an engineering company does. And it's also the thing that engineering companies tend to be not very good at. And I think Git is a wonderful tool. I think Git is actually better than what most big engineering companies use. And it's so well designed that it's cryptographically secure. And a Git repo has this cryptographic data integrity mechanism that's a Merkle tree. Okay, and then what else is a Merkle tree? Factum is a Merkle tree. And then what does Factum plug into? A proof of work blockchain, which is also a Merkle tree. So you have this chain of Merkle trees, which you can essentially consider as one Merkle tree, the root of which is pinned to a proof of work blockchain, which is immutable. And then what you can essentially do is a whole bunch of proof of work within a community, within a Git repo, okay, that then plugs into the proof of work of a proof of work blockchain, that makes the quality assurance and provenance of the updates of any Git repo public information without revealing what's in the Git repo. I think I went into the problems of open source engineering in previous talks, and the number one thing is engineers need to be able to maintain their secrets, okay, but they also need to be able to validate that the engineering itself is good and is of good quality. So we need to essentially have public engineering signatures and private engineering data. And this stack, if you will, allows us to do that. Okay. Now I've called these tokens on this slide, but you could essentially consider each token part of a factum chain, if you will. And these tokens represent the stages of origination and checking of your typical engineering document. Okay, and I'll post a link to the slides because there's a lot of data on here, and I don't want to get into it too much. But really, this is sort of the minimum data you need, assuming that the engineering public keys are tied to proper engineering reputations, okay, which I will get into in a later talk, because that's ID management, and that's a huge subject on its own, okay. But if we just take this as a given for now, okay, and using the Git branching mechanism, okay, we can, if we're updating a Git repo, we can create a branch and create a chain of these tokens, okay, and then merge back onto master branch, you know, and then we've essentially made the quality assurance of everything that's been updated on that branch public knowledge without revealing what's actually in the repo, okay, which is the problem with open source today. So we can allow engineers to keep their data private, not give it away for free, so they can actually like earn money from what they're doing, but at the same time prove the quality and provenance of the work done. Okay, and then the bottom is a branching diagram. I'll let you look at that in your own time. If you have any questions, please feel free to post in the comments below. Or maybe DM me as well, like we can maybe have a chat in the DMs or arrange a call or something. But I'll just leave this as is just now, because I think if I explain it, we've already been through a lot, and if I explain any more, I might kind of overload the brain a bit. Okay, and then this is more of a responsibility diagram. You can see the project manager is responsible for the final merge back into the master branch, and everything that happens on the update branch goes between the checking engineer and the originating engineer. Okay, and if we build this out properly, we have this chain of rings of authentication that are authenticating all the work we've done in our project, and we can zoom into them and pick out any point of update in that ring of authentication, pick out the engineer who did it, and if we're managing identity properly, and I don't see identity as a political issue, okay, I see identity as a competency issue, okay. It's about how much competence are we bringing to society, okay. And if we are going to do social credit score, we definitely need to balance that with competence. Okay, it makes it impossible for engineers to do their job properly and live up to the responsibilities they're ostensibly supposed to have if we're not balancing competence with social credit score. And it just becomes incredibly dangerous and untenable. And I think before we get into anything like voter ID on the blockchain or anything like that, we need to first shelter our engineers and our skilled workers and anyone who's managing risk at any degree in public, so they're able to live up to their professional and public responsibilities, okay? Because otherwise, in the worst case, we're going to be punishing nurses, doctors, engineers for blowing the whistle on unsafe things. And not only are the nurses, doctors, and engineers punished, but then everyone who's put in an unsafe situation is punished as well. And that, to me, is just fundamentally antisocial and toxic. So first thing, if we're talking about anything related to identity, I think we need to first talk about competence and professionalism. So, and the other thing with Git and Factum is that in terms of a LARP risk management, not only is COVID-19 a danger, but everyone trying to make a buck off the back of it or gain influence off the back of it is dangerous as well if we aren't sure about the provenance of what they're saying, why they're saying it, and where it comes from. So before we even think about forming public policy off the back of science and engineering, and especially academia, which is going through a well-publicized reproducibility crisis, I don't know why we're trusting people who can't be trusted to produce repeatable science with public policy on the fly. I just think that's incredibly dangerous, and unless we have a benchmark of where this data comes from and we're able to inspect this reputational data and inspect competence, we can never really be sure if we're receiving information from the scientific community, whether it's an Alice to Bob type of open and honest, transparent piece of information, or whether there's an agenda behind it. Okay, and we put all this together and we create a new basic map. Okay, and first of all, the barriers to entry to the red, blue, and yellow square are a lot lower. And we've got Mac's story in the middle, So you've got a very strong anchor of good blue-collar leadership values sitting in the middle of this. And the respectness constraint is held by Git, which is cryptographic integrity, and plugged into Factom and Bitcoin for the necessary public level quality assurance. And we've also got CubeSpawn holding up the respectness constraint, which is everyone in society having a sense of belonging because they own a piece of the productive capacity of that society. And I think that's a much more robust respect constraint than what we have now. And then likewise, if we're simulating real engineering in gaming, then that allows for much more mass participation. Okay, we're not subject to all of Elon Musk's and Chamath Palihapitiya's opinions and regulatory capture and, you know, their ability to have low cost access to capital and game the capital markets where we can't. We can literally sort of plug in our PlayStation 5, abide by the strong blue collar values and safety guidelines and, you know, mutual responsibility, these sorts of things, and start participating in this technological revolution in a meaningful way rather than being a spectator. And then the yellow square becomes a lot more about having fun and expressing yourself. And if we have that Penrose sequestration throttle that I talked about in the previous talk, it becomes much more safe and predictable, and really kind of puts a throttle on anyone kind of sequestering that work for out of greed or what have you. Okay, and you can see now if we're gathering on LinkedIn, so if we replace Burning Man with something more sort of professional like LinkedIn, there's really easy paths right across the board now. There's no reptilians from Saturn, there's no old money in the way, there's no regulatory capture in the way. Really, Bitcoin becomes the limiting live serial channel. And then even if we do follow a sequestration channel from green to red, that can be priced in terms of a ticket price of how much productive capacity you have to give up if you want your CubeSpawn stuff for free, if you want your engineering done for you for free. It brings all these hidden costs to the surface as well, which again makes it much more safe and makes it a much more fair deal where you know what the score is at all times. And the problem right now is that we really never do. Okay, and this is where the title of this talk comes from, Bitcoin modeled as white noise, because what Factom's doing is essentially allowing Bitcoin to sell. If you think of Bitcoin like a TV channel, Factom is selling pixels by the frame on the Bitcoin network. Okay, and if you think in terms of a bunch of pixels being sold by the frame on a TV channel, it just looks like white noise. Okay, and then so we don't have to think of Bitcoin even in terms of money. We can just think about it as the cost of rent on the serial channel necessary to anchor the quality assurance of the work we're doing. Okay, and then the price of Bitcoin reflects the price of rental on the most serialized notarization channel. And if the price goes up too much, maybe we can fork Bitcoin. And then it's just a value decision on, you know, whether the fork reduces the integrity of the data overall or it doesn't, you know. And we're not talking about reptilians from Saturn or the Rockefellers or any of that shit. It's just a clear price decision, and from clear prices we can make clear rational decisions, and that's not what technology is allowing us to do today. So the main thing missing is from this picture here is digital identity management. That's a massive topic. It's actually the first topic I got into, and sort of this talk 5 is all the work I've done since to try and finally build the foundation to get into a proper discussion about digital identity management, and we'll probably discuss that more in part 6. So in conclusion, using readily available technologies, we can radically change the landscape of economic participation. We can reduce the risk of global environmental and humanitarian catastrophe to a LARP, and really make radical shifts towards this zero waste circular economy stuff. And with this map, okay, we can do a lot of powerful things already. Okay, we can set a new agenda that runs counter to the hyper-financialized linear production taxation thinking of both the left and the right wing. They're both doing the same thing, and we can actually present a new agenda that's free from that. And we can reframe the conversation around blockchain in terms of what blockchain does as a tool, as opposed to this kind of noise going on Twitter around the sort of the latest speculative product, DeFi, sort of all these things where the rubber's never meeting the road, and it's just an excuse for people to get excited, and another pump and dump scam probably. And we can also start calling the bluff of greenwashers and climate change imposters, and I think they're sucking up so many resources and so much attention, and we really need tools and weapons to tackle this kind of thing, because I think it's just unforgivable to be promoting the green agenda but not using the resources you're given to maximum effect, and I think that's happening a lot at the moment. We can also start to begin to unite a divided political landscape around concepts with universal appeal. You know, everyone wants to own a factory, everyone wants to feel like they belong in society, everyone wants freer movement in the economic participation landscape. Everyone wants to feel involved meaningfully in this fourth industrial revolution stuff. The fourth industrial revolution isn't just an excuse for the elites and politicians and big business to do what they like and leave everyone else behind. We need to bring everyone with us, and that we're not is causing a lot of the problems that we see today, in my opinion. And another important thing is this kind of view of the world really challenges the social media dominated digital paradigm, which has become hyper normalized, and like I said, social media is operating way beyond its remit to such an extent where it's getting people killed and there's no comeback. So with the ideas like this, we can start to really challenge what the technology is for and why we're using it, and present the counterfactual that allows us to hold big tech to account. And I think that's a big problem, is they're not being held to account. Our leaders are too quick to use the power of this without exercising genuine leadership and managing the consequences of it, of which there are many unsafe consequences. And also allows us to reframe the purpose of Bitcoin and proof of work blockchains in general. You know, beyond this sort of childish libertarian price goes up kind of Bitcoin to the moon type banter, we can start to think of it more as a tool, and then what is the tool for. And money is only ever a representation of human productivity. So if we're not moving the productivity needle, then for me, I don't particularly care what the price of Bitcoin is, to be honest. And I don't think any leader worth his salt should either. Okay, and then in part 6, my first blockchain concept is called NZIG. Okay, and I'm not going to go into it at all now, but I'll leave a link to the explainer video in the description. Okay, and we'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much for listening. I very much appreciate it. This has been a difficult talk for me as well, but I hope you got as much out of it as I did. It was very actually emotionally taxing making this talk. So any comments or suggestions or questions, particularly about Git and Factom, please leave them in the comments. And yeah, I'll see you in part 6. Cheers.